She told investigators that she did fear for her life in the years after she broke free from Epstein and Maxwell, that she did fear that she could be murdered because of the fact that they knew so many rich and powerful people.
Hi, all. I'm with. This is such a devastating conversation to have. I know you're familiar with my friend Barry, the author of The Spider Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We've talked about how incredible this book is. And I think one of my first questions to you would be, does this change your book at all? The Spider. Will there be another chapter? Because I had no clue that Virginia had been so important to you in the process of writing this book, or had been such a valued source for you. So will there be any changes to the book going forward? Will you add on to it? Are you discovering new things based on the death of Virginia Giuffre?
It's hard at this point to think about, the business aspect of the book writing. I'm still really kind of in the weeds in terms of still just dealing with the fact that she's no longer with us. It really came as a true shock to me, because she was kind of the heart and soul of my book. She was certainly the most outspoken accuser, and she provided so many real links to understanding the predatory nature of the relationship between Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and herself. And she expanded, the spider web, in the sense that, according to Virginia, through interviews and also many years of court testimony, that she was trafficked out to a little more than a half dozen individuals that she claimed Epstein put her out to, in which she was sexually abused. So the details of Virginia's story really became kind of the glue that held their operation together in terms of understanding it. And that's not at all to discount the interviews that have been conducted, the media appearances, court testimony, police reports that dozens and dozens and dozens of other victims gave to authorities and the media. By no means does it discount any of those important stories, because each and every one of these survivors has a story to tell. They're all equal in weight in terms of the traumas that they suffered involving Maxwell and Epstein and possibly other men. So, it's still extremely hard for me to really grasp the fact that Virginia is gone, because she was kind of like a superwoman, in the sense that she went through so much, but still remained strong, put together a foundation to help other victims, over the years. And I have to say, she was kind of the rock of the book. She was the heart and soul of the book. And so it's devastating, I think, not only to me as an author who spent months and months poring over the interviews she gave, the court files, in terms of understanding her. Well, at the time when I was doing the book, she was in Australia, and I did go through her and her attorney to clarify some things about her. I really felt, while I had never met her, I do feel that I knew her and I knew her story, and I wanted to tell her story as accurately as I could. The decision, actually, and I don't think I've ever shared this, but the decision to move ahead with my book, The Spider Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, was really based on the fact that the woman, journalist Sharon Churcher from the Mail on Sunday, who conducted that very first interview with Virginia and tracked her down. Virginia at that time was only known in court papers as Jane Doe 102. Wow. And Sharon, through her investigative reporting, tracked her down and secured that very first interview, in which we learned for the first time about the involvement of Prince Andrew and so many others. And I always, in the years of journalism that I've conducted, I've always felt that the most accurate details and descriptions of incidents come when an individual speaks for the very first time about what they suffered or what they went through. And that's kind of the raw testimony of an individual when they're meeting with a reporter for the very first time. Sometimes as weeks or months, if they're interviewed more than that, and years go by, the facts tend to change or shift and the memory isn't as great. So Virginia's interview with Sharon was the most important interview that she ever gave in terms of understanding what went on. And I had long conversations with Sharon about the fact that I wanted to write this book, but I really wanted her involvement and help, in the sense that, is it possible for her to dig out those files, the transcripts of her interview, all the information she had collected from Virginia from, decades back, and go through it for the very first time and really report out the center of my book from that, and then expand out. And Sharon was extremely gracious, wanted all the details to come out. And so she was very gracious in the fact that she was willing to share her notes, her old files, the transcripts of the interview. And that really, after I had that material, which took months to go through and understand, then I made the pitch that I wanted to write this book. The book really grew out of those notes and files, and it really was kind of the first draft of history, as you might say, in terms of understanding her story. That's why getting my hands on that material was so important in terms of really understanding what went on. You also have to understand that when Sharon first wrote the story for the Sunday Mail, they left out a lot of the sexual details related to her claims about Prince Andrew. Of course, Prince Andrew, up to this day, for years and years, has completely denied all of Virginia's accusations and allegations against him. But the Mail was reluctant early on to reveal those very specific sexual details. And even up to the point when I put my book together, a lot of the very, very in the weeds type of details specific to the three encounters that Virginia claimed she had with Prince Andrew really weren't fully known. And I was able to expose that information for the first time in my book. And the British press really was all over those details and wrote a lot of stories about the orgy that took place on Jeffrey Epstein's island involving Prince Andrew and the allegations that Virginia made against him, because these were details that had been buried in Virginia's testimony to Sharon Churcher, and really had never fully come out until I was able to write the book. So, as I said, it's absolutely devastating, because I had put her on such a pedestal, as so many of the other survivors of Jeffrey Epstein did, after what she had endured.
I have two questions came into my head as you were talking. And The first one being, did you ever hear from Virginia in response to your book? Did you get any sense of approval from her after you wrote The Spider? And then the second question is, well, I'll let you answer that first because you're so good. So I'll let you answer that first.
I think when I was in contact with her lawyer, there was a couple questions that they were happy to clarify for me. Mm-hmm. That I wanted to make sure I had absolutely right before the book went to press. And certainly the word that I received back was that this work, my efforts at investigative journalism in regards to Giuffre and Ghislaine, were appreciated in the sense of bringing the full, unvarnished details to the surface and putting them out in a book that would then become part of kind of the public record of the true details. And Virginia never stopped fighting all of these years, even to this day, as we see in the fact that her family announced that they had come across some notes that she had written up in support of survivors for a Washington, D.C. rally for women, that despite all the other things going on in Virginia's life, and at the end we know that she was going through absolutely heartbreaking issues in her marriage, the custody of her 3 children. She had health issues. She had a accident. But even despite all of that stuff that was going on in her life, she still managed to find time to pen out in her own words some notes of encouragement for survivors moving forward in terms of how they should continue protesting and how that was so important. So, really up to the end of her life, she was a battler. She was a fighter in terms of fighting for not only the other victims of Jeffrey Epstein, but also for all sexual abuse victims across the world.
Now that is a perfect segue into my other question, because I know that you've seen the chatter online too about Virginia's credibility when it came to I have 4 days to live. Well, of course, that opened the floodgates, that if she would be capable of being dishonest about something like this, well, now everybody's saying, well, what if she didn't tell the entire truth about Prince Andrew? And I think a lot of people are regretting making those statements out loud now that we've seen that she clearly was in such a bad spot. And why wasn't the instinctual reaction to reach out and help? That was a cry for help, I am imagining. But you are really strong in your conviction that you believe Virginia.
Oh, yes. And I just want to say on your point, I think when she was in the hospital making those statements, first of all, as I said, she had been going through so many issues. We also learned recently that she had been battling really severe neck pain. She might have had at one point in recent years a broken neck through some type of accident or injury. And so when you think of everything that she went through, and then she had these very debilitating health issues. On top of that, she's going through a difficult situation in her marriage and dealing with custody of her children. And then she finds herself in an accident, ends up in the hospital. I don't think you can criticize an individual for making statements that were intended to go to a small group of people on her through her social media. She obviously was receiving a lot of medication and was in the hospital. And anyone who suffers through an accident like that, of course, you may think the absolute worst about what may happen to you. And so for anyone in the media or any of these other critics out there in the social media landscape to criticize her and to somehow connect, well, she might have been lying about that, so she might have been lying about what happened to her with Prince Andrew. I mean, to me, that is utterly and absolutely ridiculous. It's like the same people who have come forward, including Prince Andrew himself, who have questioned the legitimacy of the photo that she produced for Sharon Churcher of her with Prince Andrew. As Sharon Churcher told me and also has written about and has been verified by the FBI, right after that interview took place, the FBI was investigating and had heard that this journalist was interviewing Virginia Giuffre in Australia. They dispatched some agents there, and those agents actually took possession of the actual photo that Virginia had. It had been in the old days, you took a roll of film and you went to a photo mat, and the public doesn't know today, or young people don't know today, but in the old days when you took a photo, the film was in the canister. It had to be taken to a professional place to have the pictures printed. And in the old days, there were dates on the back of the photos. There were stamps on the back of the photos when the photos were actually printed. And they matched up. They were actually printed at a photo mat in Florida that she had gone to when she was living there after she came back from the trip with Prince Andrew, and had those pictures printed and held on to those pictures and then produced them for Sharon Churcher at the time of that interview. And the FBI took possession actually of the original photo, and they verified that that photo was had not been doctored anyway, that it was a snapshot taken of her and Prince Andrew with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. So again, you have individuals who want to hate, who want to criticize, and sadly, social media has allowed all of these critics and haters to come forward and to make outrageous claims. But when you actually research the evidence of the story, and you match up, of course, the flight logs, I didn't find any inaccuracies in what Virginia had said. Now, when you get into the fact that she had named also a half dozen men also who denied the claims made against her, these are all individual cases, and a lot of it is he said and she said, because unless you were specifically in the room, it's hard to say exactly what happened with those individuals. She knows that she was trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell to very powerful, important men. She named a lot of those men based on matching their faces up against photos of these individuals. In one particular case, she had named a very prominent attorney, and her and that attorney entered into 8 years of litigation between the two, in which he was attempting to clear his name. At the end of the 8 years of litigation, she finally said, she said, maybe I was mistaken about the identity. And the individual dropped the case and it went away.
Wow.
So, there's no perfect, as the FBI or law enforcement will tell you, there's no perfect victim, particularly when you're dealing with an individual who was being sexually abused and trafficked at age 16 and 17 years old, in terms of what their mindset was, in terms of what they remembered, in terms of the identities of the individuals without knowing the names of these people. She certainly had room to make some mistakes and some errors, but that doesn't mean that the genesis of her story is a lie or is fake or anything like that. I truly believe what she claims she went through, that she did, go through that. Now, when the prosecutors in New York were putting together the case against Ghislaine Maxwell, they decided to pass on having Virginia give testimony in that case because they wanted to keep it very simple and keep it very direct. So they chose 4 victims who had very specific and concrete stories in terms of their testimony. And the prosecutors did not disbelieve Virginia's stories, but felt that because of all the court litigation she had gone through, the interviews over the years in which she might have changed some of the facts from memory, that it was best to leave her out of that testimony. But that didn't mean that she wasn't completely supportive of the 4 women that testified against Maxwell and testified successfully, which resulted in Maxwell being convicted, and now Maxwell is in prison in Florida based on the testimony of these 4 other victims. So that, as Virginia said, when Maxwell was finally convicted, that was one of the happiest days of her life, because she had endured that abuse from the day Ghislaine Maxwell literally found her at Mar-a-Lago, where young Virginia, age 16, was working as a towel girl at the spa at Mar-a-Lago, and Maxwell convinced her to go work for Jeffrey Epstein as a masseuse. And literally that night, after meeting that earlier that day, Virginia was brought to Mar-a-Lago, and she was sexually abused that particular evening. People would say, well, why didn't she run? Why didn't she tell her father, who had been a maintenance worker at Mar-a-Lago? Why didn't she tell him and so he could go to the police? Well, you have to understand, in Virginia's case, like so many of the young victims of Jeffrey Epstein, that she had a troubled background.
She also had issues with drugs. So this was her actually cleaning herself up.
Yes, it was.
Like she was getting on the right path. Ghislaine sees her reading a book about how to give a massage and, totally takes advantage of the situation.
Totally.
I agree with you there. When people say, why didn't she tell? She didn't tell because she finally felt like she was on the right path, and she didn't want to make anybody disappointed in her. She didn't want anybody to be fearful that she'd be going down the wrong path again. There are so many different things that there's so many pieces of information we're not privy to, but also a lot of us have never been in that position before. So it's horrible to make judgments on that specific scenario. So I am glad you brought that up. And I don't remember if it was an interview with you or actually in The Spider is where I got all of that backstory and how Ghislaine pursued other young women just like Virginia who were disconnected from their families or had some sort of insecurity. So she knew to snatch them right up, and that those were the types of girls that would just go with it and not tell, which she had an eye for. I mean, she was the ultimate, I don't even know what word to use there. Recruiter's too kind of a word. But can you talk to me about this, the headlines that started circulating immediately after Virginia's death? And when it comes to the British royal family, you've been in the media long enough to know that it's all anonymous sources. So you have to take things with a grain of salt. But the stories circulating after her death that Prince Andrew thought that perhaps this might be his way back into the fold because he doesn't have the woman that has accused him of this multiple horrible assaults out in the world anymore. Do you have any reaction to those headlines? The obvious reaction is there's no way. But based on your research of Prince Andrew, do you feel like he could ever come from that? Or do you feel like he could ever be so arrogant?
I think it's absolute fantasy in terms of the fact that Prince Andrew, just because of the death of Virginia Giuffre, is somehow going to be able to rise up now and put this behind him and move on. It doesn't make sense at all. He was while he was never charged criminally, Virginia did file a sexual assault civil suit against him, in which it was decided by not only Prince Andrew, but the royal insiders at the palace, that the absolute worst thing would be for this suit to continue and for there to be a trial. And so he settled the suit. While the exact figures have never been publicly revealed, we think the payment was somewhere in the range of $15 million US in terms of what she received from Prince Andrew. Some of the money's going to the charity that Virginia started on behalf of sexual assault survivors, something that was extremely important to her. But I don't believe at all that Virginia's death is ever going to change the public perception of Prince Andrew, that he can pick up where he left off and that he's not going to be tarnished for the rest of his life. It's my belief that when he goes to his death, in the first paragraph of his obituary, it will be the fact that he became a royal outcast because of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the questions that surrounded his involvement with some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. I don't think he'll ever escape this. And I think he's going to live out the rest of his life with the scarlet letter that he was involved in this scandal, and he's never going to be able to live it down.
I agree with you. When I had people reaching out to me saying, "Is this possible?" And I was like, 2 scripted dramas written about how fiercely bad his decision was to sit down for one interview with Newsnight to try to talk his way out of this. No, those things are going to live on forever. People are going to continue to talk about this forever. His friendship with Jeffrey Epstein shows us a severe lack of judgment alone. And then you look at the Chinese spy scandal that broke over the last few months, and you're just like, obviously, this guy has an issue when it comes to judgment, period. He can say he's innocent of these claims all day long, but in the court of public opinion, guilt by association when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. Can I ask you if it's true that Virginia feared she would be murdered one day?
Oh, absolutely. That's a good question and a good point. When she was sent on this trip to Thailand, when Epstein and Maxwell sent her on this trip to Thailand to take additional massage courses over there, she viewed that opportunity because she was not with them. It was during that particular trip that she met Robert Giuffre, a martial arts instructor from Australia and Thailand, and a very quick relationship developed, and she ended up, through the strength of Robert, telling Epstein and Maxwell that she was done, that she wasn't going to go back, that she had met a man over there and that she was going to pursue this relationship, didn't want to have anything to do with them, and finally was going to make a clean break on her life after 2 years of the tortures that she went through. And after that period of time, when she was leaving, she received a lot of messages from, they weren't specific in, if you don't return, we're going to kill you. It wasn't language as specific as that, but it was certainly threatening messages that came from Epstein and Maxwell, not only about leaving them and wanting her to return, but also keeping her mouth shut in terms of telling others what she had gone through. And so she told lawyers, She told investigators that she did fear for her life in the years after she broke free from Epstein and Maxwell, that she did fear that she could be murdered because of the fact that they knew so many rich and powerful people, from politics to the arts, to entertainment and so forth. And the fact that she was also felt very strongly about wanting these other men that she claimed had abused her to be known publicly. And so, of course, when you take that on, and you're taking on not only Epstein and Maxwell, but you're taking on billionaire finance individual, a former political prime minister, some government individuals from the United States, all men that she had named. These are powerful individuals. These are powerful people. But despite the threats that Ghislaine felt, she persevered. And you have to give this woman incredible credit for the fortitude that she had in moving forward and putting her life together. And I have to say that before the decades of litigation, and she did win against Epstein, she won against Maxwell, had to pay damages to her. She won against Prince Andrew. Before she went through those decades of litigation, there was about 5 years after she first met Robert Giuffre that she was happy, that we know about, and where she felt like her life finally was at peace.
Yeah, you told Brad Hunter of The Sun in Toronto, she was fearful she would be murdered, with Maxwell leaving threatening messages. She never escaped the feeling that there were forces that were going to have her killed. That's extremely difficult to live with. She must have been in so much pain, but I never thought she would take her over, it would take over her life. That's so sad, because that like completely encompasses everything I feel right now. I'm hit by how much pain she must have been in. And I'm mad at myself that I leaned into some of the conversations about, well, if she's willing to lie about this, what else is she willing to lie about? Because clearly that was a cry for help. And why do we just immediately assume that somebody wants attention today? Why don't we go, that person's hurting, how can we help them?
Yeah, I mean, there's still, you raise all excellent points. There's still so many unanswered questions. We don't know in terms of the care she was having. Was she being watched? We just don't know specifically what went on in terms of those last final weeks of her life. We saw some photos emerge of her in the hospital, but we really don't know what truly went on. And just in terms of living with that pain, I think it's important to point out that despite the fact that after Epstein's death, that his estate was forced to put together a compensation fund for victims, and upwards of 200 victims took advantage of that compensation fund from his estate and received monies to help them move on in their lives, that the pain of what they had gone through now, in their cases, some now decades ago with Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell, to this day still tortures so many of these women as they have tried to move on with their lives. We've heard so many stories of some of these victims, and some have managed to put this behind them and have married and working in careers and things. And then there's others who are just caught up in it and can't get this out of their heads and can't get rid of these thoughts, and have turned to alcohol and drugs. And sadly, Virginia becomes the third woman now who has died, who were victims of Jeffrey Epstein. In fact, just last year, one of the 4 women who successfully testified in court against Maxwell, Carolyn Andriano, passed on from an accidental drug overdose, from a fentanyl and other drugs overdose. And her family said, despite the fact that she was personally strengthened from appearing in court and feeling that she did good for so many of the women by testifying against Maxwell successfully here in New York during that famous trial, that she was still battling so many demons and couldn't escape those demons. And they really blamed her death on the fact that she couldn't get past the horrible tortures that she had received from Epstein and Maxwell that began when she was 14 years old. And a few years before that, another woman, Sky Patrick, suffered an accidental drug overdose in Florida. And she had also been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell. And so even today, as we sit here and talk about this, there are women across this country and also the world who were victimized by Epstein, who are suffering today. And it's, it's just, despite people thinking that, well, their lives have moved on, in a lot of cases, their lives haven't moved on. And I hope that Virginia's death will also serve as a new wake-up call for the government to release whatever additional documents and files that they have, so we can continue to understand this tragedy more. And we're still waiting for the files that the government has promised. So, everything that comes forward is just another piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. Just like Virginia's initial interview to Sharon Churcher, in which she, revealed the 2 years of horror at the hands of these two individuals. Every new document that comes forward helps us fill in some of the blanks. So let's hope that we'll learn more about this terrible tragedy.
I agree. Can I ask you one last question? Where are we with Ghislaine Maxwell? In all the years that you've watched Ghislaine, have you felt an ounce of regret? Have you felt an ounce of remorse? Have you felt an ounce of guilt from this woman? And will she ever get out of jail?
Well, she continues to deny all the accusations against her. She says she's being scapegoated by the government because Jeffrey Epstein had died behind bars. But again, she got the sentence she deserved. She deserves to be behind bars. She deserves to live, her life in prison. Her family and her lawyers haven't given up. They're trying to take her case to the Supreme Court. Based on some things related to one of the witnesses, one of the jurors who didn't come forward, that the individual had been a victim of sexual abuse as a young person. And they're looking for little things that they could kind of couch some type of appeal on. But she deserves to be where she is. As I wrote in my book, she trashed these women. She didn't think anything of them. They were she was just finding women to feed them to Jeffrey Epstein in this warped sense of loyalty, some romantic sense that somehow she and him would end up together. It was absolute insanity. In terms of the recruiting. I mean, she literally stood outside of schools and parks in New York and Florida trying to recruit young women. She had a driver driving her literally around the streets, and she would spot a girl and she'd tell the driver to stop, and she would run out and try to recruit them. It was complete insanity. And of course, as I wrote in the book, she said to a close friend, who went on the record with me in the book, Ghislaine said, these girls are nothing but trash. They're trash. Oh. And so she completely dismissed these girls when they and their families had viewed them as the fact that, the promises made that they would get these girls into art schools or help them finance college because they had, goals of wanting to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And Maxwell's pitch to these girls, as I said, many of them from troubled families, was, oh, we're going to help them attain their dreams. We're going to help them. Giuffre is very generous in terms of he'll help this girl with their college education, and he'll send them to a special art school or a school for singing or playing an instrument because he wants to believe in these people. He wants them to better themselves. It was all just a come on to in a way like a serial killer, just to keep on finding victims, more and more victims, until they were finally stopped. So I don't think Ghislaine Maxwell has any remorse whatsoever. She probably was satisfied in some way when she found out in jail that Virginia had passed on. It probably was one of her better days behind bars, in the belief that she's alive and Virginia isn't. So it's just an extremely sad and troubling situation. And as I said, Virginia should be remembered as as an extremely brave woman who believed that the public needed to know about what these two had done, not only to her but to countless other victims, and she should be remembered that way.
Last question, based on, I can't believe what you said about Virginia. Did the money that Virginia had enhance or make her life worse from Prince Andrew's camp?
It's a very good question. What we do know is that she, the charity and her children were most important to her. Raising those children and furthering her charity along was extremely important to her. Certainly, the money she received may have helped her set up a better life for herself, but she lived with all of these horrible things that went on from the time she was 7 years old and couldn't shake them. And so all the money in the world can't take away from what a person has suffered through. And there's no question in my mind that if she could have done it again, she would have turned Ghislaine Maxwell down that day at Mar-a-Lago and said, "Thanks for the offer about working for this billionaire, but I'm fine working here as a $9 an hour towel girl at Mar-a-Lago, and I think I'll continue on that path." That decision to go off with Maxwell that day was a life changer for the worst part of living a life. So there's no doubt that Virginia's wrestled with that decision for years and years and years. But it's just a truly sad ending to a sad story.
You're so right. All right. Barry Levin, this has been incredible. I know you were emotional about this, and I even read the word depressed and sad. So thank you so much for opening up to me about this. You are the author of The Spider Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And if you are curious, now we know that Virginia was the heart and soul of this book. So it gives you new insight when reading these pages and when reading the book about how passionate, how Virginia's courage not only changed the life of many other survivors, but also helped get this book out, which a lot of people believe has become really the Bible when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein saga. So Barry, I can't thank you enough for your kindness today and for your wonderful insight. And, it does feel to me like you feel like you lost a friend. So I am so sorry for your loss, and I appreciate you talking to me about that.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll talk again, and and hopefully it'll be under better and more positive circumstances. Maybe when the files are released and we learn some new, facts about this ongoing case.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Okay.